Everyone thinks manifestation takes time, but what if time has nothing to do with it? What if the reason something hasn't shown up yet has nothing to do with how big the desire is or how long it's been imagined, but everything to do with the fact that it's still being watched like a boiling pot on the stove? What if the very act of checking is the reason it hasn't appeared yet? That might sound hard to hear, but it's the kind of truth that breaks everything open. Because the moment something stops being checked on, the moment it stops being waited for, the moment it's no longer needed to feel whole, that's the moment it arrives. Not because the universe suddenly decides it's time, but because the state of having it finally replaces the state of waiting for it. This changes everything, and once it clicks for good. It always seems so harmless in the beginning. There's a desire, something that feels important, maybe something that's been wanted for a long time. So there's an intention, some imagining, maybe affirmations. And in those moments, there's peace. For a little while, it feels like it's already done. But then the mind starts looking again. The outside world feels louder than the inner one. And the checking begins. It's subtle at first, checking the phone, watching the clock, wondering if it's close. But that checking is the delay. It's not neutral. It's a signal that the desire hasn't been accepted as already done. That checking is rooted in lack, in a quiet panic that maybe it's not working, maybe it's not coming. And that inner state of uncertainty is what holds the very thing away. Manifestation isn't about getting something. It's about being the version of self who has it already. It's about the state of knowing, the feeling of wholeness without needing proof. The moment something stops being checked on is the moment it starts being real. Because no one checks for what they know is already theirs. No one refreshes the screen on what's already arrived. What delays it isn't the size of the desire or how long it's been wanted. It's the checking, the watching, the waiting, the obsession with seeing proof before feeling secure. But that's not how it works. The feeling comes first. The knowing must come before the seeing. And when that knowing is real, checking becomes pointless. It fades naturally. The urge to check always comes from fear. Fear it's not happening. Fear it won't work. Fear something is missing. But nothing's missing. The only gap is in the state of being. It's not about effort. It's about identity. If there's still a version of self who doubts, who waits, who watches, that's the version that needs to fall away. Because the version who lives in the end isn't waiting. That version is calm, present, unbothered. The need to monitor every move of the outside world is what keeps the inner world stuck in not yet. And manifestation only happens in the now. It doesn't unfold when something is needed to feel complete. It shows up when there's no more looking, no more waiting, no more checking. Just being. When the checking ends, the state is finally stable. That's when things move fast. It never really took time. It only took that inner shift, that soft, quiet moment when it finally stops mattering if it's here or not, because it's already true inside. Letting go of the outcome sounds simple, almost too simple, but doing it feels like the hardest part. That's because the desire is personal. It means something. It carries weight, emotion, memory, and identity. It's not just about having the thing, it's about what the thing symbolizes. Maybe it means finally being chosen, finally feeling enough, finally being safe, seen, secure. And when that emotional charge is still active, it becomes almost impossible to stop checking. Not because of impatience, but because there's still something missing inside that feels like it can only be filled once the outside matches up. This is the part no one really talks about. Manifestation isn't just about visualizing something and then trying to distract yourself while you wait. It's about what that desire reveals about the version of self you've been living. Because the truth is, the checking isn't just a habit, it's an identity. It's the identity of the one who waits, the one who wonders, the one who hasn't yet received. And as long as that version of self is still running the show, the outcome remains separate. It has to, because the state of not having is still active. Letting go isn't about pretending you don't care. It's not about pushing the desire away or acting like it doesn't matter. It's about seeing that the version of you who needs it in order to feel whole isn't the real self. That version was born from a wound, a lack, a moment of separation. And no matter how many affirmations are repeated or how often the scene is visualized, if the identity of I don't have it yet is still alive underneath it all, the outer world won't shift. The reason letting go feels like losing control is because the old self was never in control to begin with. That old self believed safety came from managing outcomes, from watching everything closely, from holding on tightly. But real power isn't in clinging, it's in resting. It's in dropping the need to control because the outcome is already assumed. That's what the new self knows. That's the version of you that already lives in the end. The one who doesn't watch the clock or read into every silence. The one who feels safe without proof. And this shift isn't about doing something perfectly. It's about honesty. It's about noticing where that grasping is still happening. Where the old identity still fears being without. Where the checking still feels necessary to feel secure. And just bringing awareness to that is enough to begin breaking the pattern. Not by force, but by choosing to stop feeding the fear. Because when the desire is no longer tied to survival, when it's no longer responsible for filling a hole inside, letting go becomes natural. You stop checking, not because someone said it's the right technique, but because you genuinely don't need to anymore. The truth has landed. The assumption is solid. And in that space, that inner calm, things finally move. Not because you gave up, but because you finally stopped holding your breath. There's a truth that slips past most people, even when they've been studying manifestation for a long time. Wanting something doesn't bring it closer. It actually pushes it away. Because wanting, no matter how sincere or passionate, carries the energy of lack. It says, "This isn't mine yet." It says, "I need this to feel whole." And what's even more subtle, but far more powerful, is that reality is always shaped by the identity being lived from, not by the desire being held on to. That's why the same techniques work like magic sometimes and seem completely useless at other times. It's not about what's being visualized. It's about who is doing the visualizing. When the identity underneath is rooted in lack, in unworthiness, in needing something outside to feel complete, then no matter how perfect the technique is, the state is still "I don't have it." And that's what continues to be reflected. You don't attract what you daydream about. You attract what you've accepted as normal, what feels natural, what you assume without trying. That's the state that creates. And the second that state becomes real, not just imagined, but accepted, the outer world bends to meet it. That's not wishful thinking. That's how consciousness works. It's how every manifestation has ever happened. The reason checking slows everything down is because it shows the state hasn't changed yet. It shows that the desire is still being chased. And if it's being chased, then it can't be lived in. You can't occupy the end while still waiting for the beginning to shift. That's why the most important work isn't outer action, it's becoming. Becoming the version of self who already lives in that reality. The version who no longer sees the desire as a far-off goal but as something natural, something obvious, something already done. This is the turning point. When the identity stops matching the old story, the new story unfolds on its own. And the way to shift that identity isn't by forcing or pretending. It's by gently noticing the parts of the old self that are still holding on. The doubts, the fears, the urgency, and meeting them with something new. With awareness, with presence, with love. Because manifestation isn't about chasing. It's about remembering. Remembering the version of you that doesn't need to wait. The one who already feels whole. The one who knows how powerful stillness can be. That version doesn't ask, "Where is it?" That version knows it's already here. And from that state, from that deep inner knowing, things begin to move without effort. Not because of repetition. Not because of tricks, but because the truth is now being lived. The identity has changed. The story has changed. And when that shift is real, checking becomes irrelevant. There's nothing left to watch, nothing left to force, just the unfolding of what's already yours. There's a space that no one likes to talk about, the quiet space between planting the desire and seeing the result. That silence often feels empty, confusing, and uncomfortable. It's where doubt starts creeping in, where the mind begins asking questions like, "Why isn't it here yet?" Or "Did I do something wrong?" It's in this space that people start checking, refreshing, monitoring, spiraling. But that space isn't punishment. It's not a delay. It's a mirror. It reflects back everything still active within the inner world. That silence is where the real transformation happens, not because of what's done in the outer world, but because of what's seen in the inner one. In that quiet space, all the noise that was always there gets louder. The patterns that were once unconscious start showing up clearly. That fear of not being enough, the habit of waiting for validation, the urge to control, it all rises up, not to punish, but to be noticed, to be seen clearly. And that clarity is a gift. It's what allows the shift to happen. What feels like nothing is happening is often the moment when the deepest parts of the old identity are coming up to be released. But if that discomfort is misunderstood, if it's seen as failure or a sign that manifestation isn't working, then the checking begins again. And that checking feeds the very state that's trying to fall away. It keeps the loop going. It says, "I don't trust this process." It says, "I'm not safe until I see proof." And that energy holds the new reality at a distance. But what if that silence wasn't emptiness at all? What if it was a test of who you're becoming, not from the universe, but from your own inner world? What if every second of not yet was an invitation to sit deeper in the end? To hold the assumption longer, to trust the inner knowing even when there's no proof? That's what actually stabilizes the new state. That's what makes it real. It's easy to believe something when it's in your hands, but creation doesn't work that way. The belief has to come first. The feeling has to come first. The trust has to come first. That silence isn't the universe withholding. It's giving you space to choose a new identity. One that no longer waits, no longer doubts, no longer checks. One that simply knows. And the moment that inner knowing becomes stronger than the need to check, the moment the silence stops feeling threatening and starts feeling peaceful, everything begins to unfold. The outer world doesn't rush to fill the gap until the gap is closed on the inside. So the silence is not a delay. It's a mirror. And the question is never, "Where is it?" The real question is, who am I being in this silence? The answer to that question is what determines what shows up next. Not the words, not the effort, not the time, just the state. Always the state. And once the state is stable, the silence ends, not because it's forced to, but because it no longer serves a purpose. There's a quiet truth that changes everything once it lands. The thing being asked for isn't running late, it's simply waiting for alignment. It's not about chasing down a result or trying to force something to happen. It's about becoming the version of self that no longer waits, the one who already is, because in reality, nothing needs to be attracted. It's already finished in the unseen. But to live in the seen, it needs a new state, a new self to rest in. And that self isn't built by watching the clock. It's not born through anxious checking. It's not created by constantly scanning the world for signs. That self is discovered in stillness, in letting go of the story that says I need this now to be complete. Because if it feels like waiting, that's a clear signal that the version of self being lived from still believes the thing isn't here. And that identity keeps pushing it further out. Manifestation has never been about timing. It's always been about readiness. Not in the sense of doing more or being perfect, but in the sense of being aligned, being open, being stable in the truth. When there's no more tug of war inside, when there's no more fight to convince or prove or grasp, the thing shows up because it finally has a place to land. The resistance is gone. The identity is steady. And from that steadiness, it flows. This is why the moment someone truly stops checking, things often shift quickly. It's not because of reverse psychology. It's not a trick. It's because the state has finally changed. The inner story is no longer about waiting, it's about living. It's no longer about needing, it's about knowing. And that knowing isn't loud. It's soft, quiet, but unshakable. It doesn't need reassurance because it is the reassurance. The old self checked because it was afraid, because it needed to be sure, because it didn't trust the inner world to create without constant supervision. But creation doesn't respond to fear. It responds to identity. And identity is stable. It doesn't waver. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait. It rests in what's already true. So the question isn't, why hasn't it happened yet? The real question is, what part of me is still holding the story that it hasn't? What part is still feeding the version of self that needs evidence before peace is allowed? Because once peace is no longer conditional, the outer world has no choice but to reflect it. It's never been about waiting for the world to catch up. It's about dropping the version of self that thinks it's behind. And the moment that identity dissolves, the moment the need to check is replaced by a quiet inner knowing, things shift, not because of effort, but because readiness has finally arrived. And in that readiness, the desire is no longer separate. It's simply the next obvious step in the unfolding. There's a moment on this journey when something clicks, a moment where all the effort, all the striving, all the checking simply stops. Not because the desire is given up, but because it's no longer needed in the same way. It doesn't define worth anymore. It doesn't carry the weight of I'll be happy when. It simply becomes part of the unfolding, natural, expected, unattached. And that's the exact moment it begins to show up with ease, because it's no longer being held with tension. It's being allowed. The illusion has always been that the thing was needed to feel whole, that without it, something was missing. But the truth is, nothing outside ever made anyone whole, because no one was ever broken to begin with. The only thing that ever needed to change was the story, the identity, the inner concept of self that kept saying, this thing will finally prove I'm enough. And as long as that story was running, the desire stayed just out of reach, not because it was being denied, but because it couldn't enter a space built on lack. That's why it happens the moment it's not needed anymore. Because the not needing isn't giving up, it's rising up. It's becoming a new version of self, one that's no longer operating from emptiness, but from fullness, one that doesn't seek the thing to complete anything, but welcomes it as something already claimed, already felt, already lived. This isn't about detachment in the cold sense. It's not about pushing the desire away or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about becoming the version of self for whom that desire is already natural, familiar, a given. That version doesn't panic when it's not here yet, because it no longer lives in a story of separation. It doesn't obsess or track or check, because it knows how the process works. It knows that the outer is always just a delayed echo of the inner. And when the inner is stable, the outer follows. It has to. So the goal is never to force the result. It's to stabilize the state, to become so grounded in the truth of already being, already having, already living in the end, that nothing else makes sense anymore. Not because of pretending, not because of blind faith, but because the identity has changed. And when the identity changes, the world changes with it. Everything starts and ends with the state of being. Every check, every moment of doubt, every search for signs is really a moment of slipping back into the old self, the one that was never truly in control, the one that thought things had to be chased. But the new self knows better. It doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait. It receives. It allows. It becomes. And that's why the moment you stop checking, not as a trick, but as a byproduct of inner alignment, that's the moment it's done. Because it's already yours. It's not a matter of time. It's a matter of self. So here's the simple truth to carry with you. The moment you stop checking isn't the moment you give up. It's the moment you step fully into who you truly are. It's the moment you stop chasing a future that's already been created in the unseen. When you stop watching, doubting, and forcing, you allow the natural flow of life to bring what's meant for you exactly when you're ready to receive it. Trust that timing, trust the process, and most importantly, trust yourself, because the power was never outside. It was inside all along. Tell me, what's the hardest part about trusting the timing of your manifestation? Share your thoughts below. Your honesty might be the key to unlocking someone else's breakthrough.